So the next speaker is another one, and if I call him Australian, he will kick my butt right here. But his name is Jamie Scott. He is a sports and exercise science and human nutrition specialist. He has also come over to the States the last couple of years. He's actually gotten to present, which is really hard to do, by the way, to get on the Ancestral Health Symposium presenters list, but he's gotten to present. So he's big news in this part of the world, and we're just really glad to have him. Welcome, Jamie Scott.
Tough act to follow and a tough introduction to live up to. Right. Just by way of a bit more of introduction of what I do for a day job, because this is very much a hobby for me most of the time. I work for a corporate health company in New Zealand, and we've been, I guess, relatively pioneering in this field in that we're one of the only corporate health companies that we've been able to gauge, at least certainly within Australia and New Zealand and possibly worldwide, that's actually taking kind of the whole paleo evolutionary framework actually into businesses and educating people within their workplaces about how to look after their health and well-being. So large part of my job is to actually go into business, and I talk to them about nutrition. I'm a nutritionist by trade, I guess. It's my main qualification background, but one of the things that ends up being one of our most popular presentations is a sleep presentation. So when you go into a company and ask them what sort of health information would you like, here's what's on offer, so we can come and talk to you about food or physical education or sunlight exposure or sleep, and they're all like, oh, we need sleep. And what we can kind of gauge from that is that there's this big need out there, I guess, for people to address their sleep deprivation issues, and certainly anecdotally going into those businesses and talking to people, we get a lot of feedback that people are really struggling with their sleep. They don't kind of feel rested enough, they don't feel like they're getting enough sleep overall. So I'm going to tackle that topic today, and I'll do it by virtue of the fact that I think we see a lot of these sorts of sayings thrown around. I think you've been exposed to that today earlier on with Jamie's presentation. We also hear things like you can't out-exercise a bad diet. So there's a lot of focus on food, and fair enough too. I'm not going to subdue myself out of a job by saying we shouldn't focus on food, but maybe we focus on it just a little bit too much. Now, when all of us are sort of coming from a background of having had relatively poor diets, relatively poor health as a result of that, then yeah, food should be one of our primary focuses. But it shouldn't be our only focus, and we need to be very, very careful that we don't drop all our eggs into one basket, because there's plenty of other stuff out there which actually has a very similar impact, I guess, on our health overall. One of the things with food, and particularly around the carbohydrate side of it, is that we're looking at what happens to some of the downstream hormonal pathways. And it's not just food that has an impact on those hormonal pathways. Exercise does, sunlight does, and sleep does as well. So what is some of that other stuff? And in no particular order, things like sunlight, sun exposure. Everyone's kind of probably fairly familiar with the whole vitamin D issue, but there are lots of other aspects outside of vitamin D that sunlight's very important for. So Anastasia and I were having a bit of a giggle driving up from Port Macquarie and seeing all the anti-sun billboards as we were approaching Queensland. Sex is very important, and don't let anyone tell you anything otherwise. Slow movement. So we're a big fan of slow movement. So by slow movement, we mean people kind of getting out and just kind of, I guess, standing for a start rather than sitting all day every day, and getting out and doing quite low-level activity rather than, I guess, the two kind of polarized options that most people are familiar with, which is going out and doing lots of endurance-type training or beating themselves up with lots of high-intensity interval training. We advocate kind of first and foremost that they actually just get out and do just some low-intensity work, lots of walking, slow movement type stuff, and that was what I presented on this year at Ancestral Health Symposium. We're social animals. We live in tribes of some extent to another, so socialization is very, very, very important to us. And probably most of us have experienced, as we've kind of gone down this rabbit hole of low-carb paleo, is that some of the stuff we do is quite isolating. And Anastasia wrote a post on the Whole Nine site just recently talking about the socialization side of things. Very important. Stress resiliency, which is primarily what I do for my day job. So we're sort of coaching people within the workplace how to be resilient under under stressful situations. Seasonality, which Anastasia touched on, and sleep's very important. So we've got all these other things which we kind of need to account for, and we're kind of constantly focused on food. We perhaps maybe miss some of that stuff. And when we kind of start to fall off the wagon a little bit, things aren't kind of quite going as well as what we'd hoped. We're not getting the results that maybe we've seen other people get in terms of their low-carb paleo approach. It might be that we're not necessarily addressing some of these aspects. And all of those things are sort of very, very human aspects. They're part of us as a species. They're things that we need to address. They're just as compulsory for us as breathing and food. In our society, though, we tend to champion this guy. This guy's a bit of a hero to us, and we probably all know people like that. This is the guy who is still sending out work emails at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. This is being video recorded, isn't it? So I can't slag my boss off. He's really bad for this. Sorry, Brad. So people up late at night, and then there's still the ones who are up at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock to make the first class in the morning at the gym or wherever they go to. And these are heroes. These are the guys that refer to sleep as just being a caffeine deficiency. And we kind of celebrate them, and we kind of wish that we could be like them because we could fit more things in during the day. This is what I tend to think of those people. When we look at sleep restriction, we've got to look at the hormones that go with it. And there's been quite a bit of research around this area. So if you ever want to go and use Dr. Google and just go and put in sleep restriction and carbohydrates, you'll get a massive number of hits in terms of the research around this area. And there's a good reason for that research, and that there's a massive overlap between some of the hormones that go with overconsumption of carbohydrate and a lack of sleep. 2 or 3 of the hormones in particular. So we've got up the top there ghrelin, which is a hunger stimulating hormone. So if you don't get enough sleep, then your appetite goes up. You actually have a desire for more food. And most of us have experienced that. We've had a couple of rough nights sleep. We tend to kind of turn into eating machines after 2 or 3 days for no reason other than our hormones are going up. And then we've got these other 2 hormones, so GLP and leptin, and they're our satiety hormones. So they're the 2 hormones that tell us we're actually full, and they decrease. So appetite gets ramped up. Sensations of fullness or feelings of fullness go down when you're sleep deprived. So bad news if you're trying to control your appetite and your food intake. We also see that length of sleep, which is probably primarily most people's focus when they start to think about sleep. They're thinking about how long they're sleeping for. So length of sleep, but also time in deep sleep and REM sleep or dream sleep. Probably the most important period of sleep that you can get is the first 3 hours, because that's when you drop into deep sleep. And that's when you get your biggest growth hormone release, and that controls a lot of the downstream effects on your biology. So when we're trying to get people to sleep better, we're really pushing that first 3 hours and making sure that they're achieving that. So both length of sleep and time of sleep has problems if we're not getting enough of each one. So we get a decrease in metabolic rate, increase in hunger, our food intake goes up, and we especially tend to gravitate more towards carbs. So, who's experienced that? Had a couple of rough nights sleep, we just want carbs. Give me sugar. Preferably mixed in a bucket of caffeine. We've all been there. One of the things we see is that our impulse control is low, and we get delayed gratification with the sleep deprivation. And this makes us a little bit more vulnerable when we see things that start to get a little bit tempting for us. So if we've had a good night's sleep and diet's been pretty well under control, we're going well, we can often push away some of the temptations that we're all faced with. At the end of the day, all of us kind of eating this kind of healthy food are freaks. When we go into our workplaces, we're faced with all sorts of things. And again, Anastasia coming out of the hospital constantly has a rant at me about the number of cupcakes floating around those places. So when we're sleep deprived, our resistance to those temptations drop. So what happens when we're suddenly put in this scenario? Is our inability to say no to the cupcake or the donut, is it because we lack willpower? We're just not strong enough? We're a bit weak up here? Or is it we just haven't had enough sleep for a few days? And it's a good chance it's related to the sleep. After 4 days in a row of inadequate sleep, our abdominal fat cells become more insulin resistant, and we lose our insulin sensitivity. So we lose our ability to tolerate carbohydrate in our diet on sleep deprivation. Now, last time I calculated, most of us are probably doing a minimum 5 days a week as far as work goes. So that's 5 sleeps that are probably not quite long enough. And you can see up there 4 days in a row is enough to switch that system, that insulin-resistant system on. So that's bad news. So, when we're trying to manage our insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity through carbohydrate alone, just how low do we have to screw it down when we're sleep deprived? Do we perhaps have to go lower carb than probably what is comfortable just because we're not getting enough hours in the bed? When we are losing weight, but we're sleep deprived, disproportionately that weight will come out of your lean mass. So you tend to lose more muscle than you do body fat when you're in a sleep-deprived state. Just one of the studies you can see down the bottom there. For the subjects that were on less than 6 hours a night, they lost a little over half a kg of fat during the period of the study, but they lost nearly 2.5 kg of lean tissue, compared with those who were getting more than 8 hours a night, and the split between fat and lean tissue was fairly even. So yes, the number on the scales might be tracking down. You might be sleeping 5.5 hours a night, and you're kind of happy because the weight loss is working, but where's it coming from? And is that going to catch up on you at a later date? And odds on it will. So again, when people come in and see us and sort of say, I've tried this low carb thing or I've tried this paleo thing and it didn't work and my weight rebounded back, what can I do? Do I just need to do it harder? Am I weak? Those sorts of things. So maybe it's a food issue, but maybe it's not. Sleep deprivation is a potent disruptor of many metabolic processes involved in energy regulation, especially carbohydrate metabolism. So again, are we in a situation where we really need to keep focusing on the carbohydrate all the time, or do we look outside of that for some of these other things? Now, we need to be very, very careful with our reductionist thinking. Now, we've all been exposed to the whole dietary fat thing for many, many years now, and we still are to a degree. And that, in fairly loose terms, says that dietary fat causes disruptions in our body fat metabolism. And we know that's not true. And you've probably heard many excellent speakers over the course of the day saying that we shouldn't fear fat the way we have done historically. But at the same time, we also need to be very, very careful that we don't make the same mistake with carbohydrates, that we don't position them as the absolute evil that we have with fat. Yes, we all probably eat far too many of them in our modern society, but we can't reduce it down and say that problems with carbohydrate metabolism internally are a result of dietary carbohydrate. And I think that's probably where one of the shifts, certainly within the paleo framework, has been over the last year, 18 months, is that we're sort of starting to relax a little bit around the carbohydrate, certainly not going back up to Western diet levels, but possibly not screwing them down as tightly as what we have done right at the start. So we come back to this. So I'd say sleep deprivation is not fixed in the kitchen. So we need to be very, very careful that we're not trying to address other issues, and we're not trying to address some of the other stuff that's going on in our life with food. And perhaps when we've only got enough time and enough energy for a singular focus, it is too easy to kind of get trapped into the whole diet mode. And equally, we can't fix things with exercise, and sleep deprivation is certainly not something that's going to be fixed in the gym. By the way, goldfish are totally paleo too. As far as getting a good night's sleep goes, one of the things that we try and coach people is not to try and get a good night's sleep or prepare for their good night's sleep just as they climb into bed. People often sort of say, how do I get a good night's sleep? I try and sleep more, but I just can't sleep particularly well. Your good night's sleep starts pretty much as soon as you wake up in the morning. So we've got up there, you need to see the sunlight. You need to get bright light in your eyes. We've got 2 key hormones which regulate our sleep patterns overall, cortisol and melatonin. Cortisol is the hormone that wakes you up in the morning. Melatonin is the hormone that puts you to sleep. To have those 2 hormones run in a fairly good cycle between the 2 of them, and to run efficiently, you need to get bright light in your eyes to wake you up in the morning. And that sets your melatonin pulse for later on. So you're talking about something that's occurring probably at least 12 hours out before going to bed. We need to kill the caffeine. We've got all sorts of sources of caffeine going into our diet. Some people tend to tolerate it a little bit better than others, but generally speaking, caffeine within our system has a half-life of about 6 hours. So it takes about 6 hours to run whatever dose of caffeine you've got currently circulating around down by about a half. If you're constantly chugging away on the coffee all day, every day, you can get to the point where 9 o'clock at night, you've still got the equivalent of a long black circulating around your system. Now, people say, but I can get to sleep. it's not about getting to sleep, it's about staying asleep, and it's about dropping through your sleep cycles. It's about getting that good deep sleep through the first 3 hours. And yes, you might be able to drop into stage 1, stage 2 sleep with some caffeine still circulating around your system, but can you drop right down in stage 4 deep sleep? And that's the key difference. And we need a blue light blackout as well. So blue light to our eyes, and blue light is thrown out by those things there and these things here in particular. As far as these things are concerned and the receptors in your eyes are concerned, this is staring at the sun. So if you're working on a laptop or twittering away 5 minutes before you go to bed, you're staring at the sun. And remember that the sun tells you to wake up. So we need to kind of kill our little playthings just before we go to bed. So no point updating your Facebook status 5 minutes before you go to bed. Saying, really sleepy, hope I get a good sleep tonight. And remember that there's other stuff that goes on in the bedroom too. Something to do with cute fluffy rabbits. Bedrooms aren't for working. They're not an office. They're not a TV room. Increasingly, as the price of TVs come down, the size of TVs sitting in bedrooms have gone up, and all the new TVs tend to throw out a ton of blue light as well. They're not a place to, just as you and your happy partner are just starting to doze off, they're not a place to go, can we talk? Do that during the day. They're a place for socialisation, slow movement, sex, and possibly a combination of all three. And eventually, if you're doing everything right, you'll get a good night's sleep after that lot. Done. There we go. Thank you.